The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
There we are. The Mannin Line is now open for you. 66 13 68, please, is the telephone number. Catherine will answer your call. And also you can text and email to me here in the studio, 166177 for the texts, or studio@manxradio.com for the emails. And with me in the studio is Courtenay Heading, who was one of our guests on the Any Questions the other night when we recorded it. Well, of course, Courtenay, you will have heard that recording. That's only about half of what happened the other night, because it's an edited recording but I thought it was quite interesting the other night, because we clearly had a clued up audience who really said very little. Yeah. It was quite surprising, really, wasn't it?
Yes, I think people often apologise for what they're going to say, so they say it in private. And I think eventually we have to break through that and have a bigger open debate and welcome that public debate. So hopefully we can start to open up some areas. And even the committee that Julie Edge is now involved with, MHK, on whistleblowing, it signifies things are changing. And there's an openness, which I think is great.
Yes, well, of course, the Any Question programmes, this programme used to run quite a few of them. We haven't had a few for quite a while. And we'd have all different sorts, from whether they were in farming communities, they could be interesting. Yep. Whether they're straight political ones, which cannot be interesting sometimes. Yeah. But we used to have maybe it's the days of a public meeting seem to have gone, don't they, these days? Everybody communicates by the social media. Seem to be getting a group of people in a hall to have a good ding-dong doesn't seem to be popular. Well,
I don't know if we have a Terry Thomas ding-dong, but maybe we have some meetings. We've got some planned in June this year on wellness, in September on statins again, and in December again on the wellness vision. So those public meetings, put them on in the Manx Museum and film them. And that debate is lacking in what I often call unsocial media. Now, our numbers and names and views are sold to the highest bidder, and that's not healthy, as we're seeing amongst the young. So open public debate, filmed. I think this island could really be what we'd call it, sacred space or truth tellers, whatever we call it. But that debate often can't happen in near isles. I found that when I moved here.
Well, now, let's look at this. You're already talking about wellness, and I introduced you all the way through the programme from the Wellness Centre, but we didn't really tell people what it was.
Well, it's not a centre yet. I'm still working on what we do, and one of those may be to bring here, I hope, the world's second carbohydrates addiction clinic. There's one in South Africa. It's a long story, but you can look it up. Professor Tim Noakes, he's had some interesting history. And then he had a Damascene moment 33 years ago. After 33 years on a carbohydrate diet. He said he got it wrong, and he shouldn't, as a marathon runner, have been based on a diet that's uniformly adopted, but has led to the greatest incidence of obesity, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. Many call that type 3 diabetes. So he says high-fat, omnivore, plant-based diet is the way to go. And there's evidence around the world from UK and America that's right. But I'd first like to give an overview of what I call wellness and what I think we can move towards. So to diversify our economy, we have to first align behind a sound strategy, which would come from a clearly articulated vision based on the leadership of this island, saying, how could we become the Isle of Well man, the Isle of Well woman? And what we look at is the economic opportunities where agriculture meets wellness. So what you eat being the building blocks of lifelong wellness. And we have a massive history, 150 years of farming, of hemp production in Tremode. So these things that we can look at that are coming to the public consciousness. And we have sea waters, our own waters, where brain foods that replace the current carbohydrate, carbs and sugar model, they become part of our essential way of being, of seafood, algae, oysters, queenies, high-value niche products that are clean and help detoxify the body.
Well, what you're saying doesn't come as a great surprise to me, because this business of too much sugar, too much various other types of things, fat maybe. You talked about a fat diet, but there's fat and fat, isn't there? There's in different sorts. It's not entirely new here. I did a programme a few years ago where we recorded it in a museum in Manchester, where they had the history of food, in that instance throughout the northwest of England. But it was interesting to see that obviously today's food had a tremendous range of stuff, a lot of it processed and pre-made in various places. Go back to wartime, then you go back a bit beforehand. The range of food was so much simple compared to today. But interesting enough, although there were obviously complaints which they didn't know how to treat, the complaints that we have today, which seem to be related to diet and food, hardly existed.
No, I think we've got many cases denatured, over-processed and toxic foods which reside in the body a lot longer, trans fats perhaps for 50 days. So once you see how you can change the body from being sugar adapted, sugar expectant, you find that diabetes in many cases, type 2, is not a lifelong problem once you change the diet. You'd look to bring Professor Roy Taylor here from Newcastle University, who's done exactly these trials, experiments in both Glasgow and Newcastle by changing to less calories but healthier, sustainable diets. And over time they find that fat satiates the body in a way that sugars don't. Sugar says, give me more, I'll store that sugar as fat. But actually healthy fats, so DHA, omega-3s for the brain, these are the areas in the world that aren't having the level of dementia when they eat them. And the most diverse crops, the most diverse plant areas have the least amounts of diabetes, dementia and cancer.
And are the figures, you're saying this, but are there provable figures out there that will stand up to support that?
We will bring in, for public debate, free, and distribute 1,000 leaflets, which I'm currently doing, which compare the UK Eat Well Guide, the US My Plate Guide, the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, and the Alliance for Health food guidelines. And the difference is, with the first three I mentioned, UK, US and Harvard, you look at the traffic light system, they lead to diabetes over time. So Professor Tim Noakes looked at how he got diabetes over 40 years of running, eating the wrong diet, and although his family had an instance of diabetes, it was his diet, his habits that drove that. So he became a pariah when he said, I'm forming the world's first carb addiction clinic. If we look at wellness and define that in patient terms, they're more affordable, they work longer, they live healthier, they're cheaper from the medical point of view, but they start to drive wellness through and they educate their grandkids in this is healthy diets. We've strayed from that.
We're all told to steer clear of fats because of you're building up cholesterol in your system, not the good cholesterol but the bad cholesterol. So steer clear of fat from meat, steer clear of this, all sorts of steer clears come to the surface. I'm trying to remember the name of the diet, but I know two people who took a diet which meant they had a huge amount of fat and lost weight.
I say, as do some of my friends, eat fat to finish in terms of the parish, and that's proven in many cases. So some of us are finding the parish a bit short.
We're talking about the parish walk.
We're now looking to the 100-miler for a proper test. So if you look at the cholesterol con, that's not my words, that's the words by Malcolm Kendrick, and you look at the wholesale misinformation, we're now seeing the biggest problems with statins being overprescribed. So we're bringing a cardiologist here in September that will say, in his words, I have to use the C word, he used it, it is criminal for 85% of the people currently on statins to be on them for primary care. We've had one debate available on welltube.im, but the debate this September, a year on, will invite people from around the world to speak, debate on camera and show that the cholesterol hypothesis is wrong and why cholesterol and eating fats is good for you.
But there's
so those evidences are there, but the statins industry, by reducing by threefold the levels of cholesterol, meant we have the most dementia addled, sadly, the most chronically challenged people for the natural repair mechanism. So of the 12 types of cholesterol, we will examine the science, we'll debate the science, and we'll look at the harms that come and only have that open debate, can we move forward?
Right. Now, the one thing I hear you say that, but there was a time, not very long ago, that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think GPs here were given some sort of bonus, some sort of payment to get people onto statins.
They are lacking in nutritional knowledge. They perhaps do a week in a year at medical training. They can't defend the science because statins interrupt coenzyme Q10, the natural building blocks for our hormones. It's in every cell, it's overexpressed in our brain, and I find it, as others do, literally, I hate to say this on a Sunday morning chatty program, criminal what we have done. So we'll look at the erectile dysfunction, the mind, mood, muscle myopathies, the gallbladder issues, the cancer issues. So the cardiologists we bring here will face public debate and will say, let us follow the science.
So you're trying a different approach to things. Obviously, the Department of Health and Social Care, dealing with the health side of it at the moment, has a serious issue with, they're talking about prevention, but the prevention that we hear about does tend to be still the traditional and accepted line.
Chemical cocktails don't work. We ignore what diets people are putting in them. We ignore their hydration levels, their sleep levels. And so we're tracing we're treating a chronic disease burden of decades with acute harsh medicines. And those chemical cocktails people are struggling with as these gateway drugs go into their bodies.
You're doing this, but it's still the GP who prescribes the pills. Now, what do you think is happening? I mean, are they accepting your message?
Privately, I hope to get some to say what they said to me in my home. Statins cause diabetes. We're just disease mongers. And this is a difficult area to broach with them, and even nurses here that have seen patients be put on life support because they're interrupting the very repair mechanism. We need to look upstream at the causes and help collaboratively as doctors move from being gods to guides for patient wellness. The reason the government is talking this area to try and diversify the economy is because they've run out of other people's money to spend.
Right, now let's go back. We'll come back maybe to this subject later, but we've got one or two responses, just one or two coming in, which relates to the diversification of the economy, which we were discussing in the earlier programme. The first one says that farmers have been trying to persuade government not to mothball the agricultural industry as it would create employment and general income, but we've hit a government brick wall. Now, would you say that? Would you say that our agriculture industry has been stifled?
I don't know some of them well enough, but I've seen some very entrepreneurial young farmers who are prepared to go out on a limb, but it often means the current orthodoxy feels threatened. I think it's an enormous opportunity. This is the cheery side of the programme. We should encourage, whether it's apple orphanage, Green Man Water, Queenies, Christmas puddings, all sorts of things in a combination that can go from the Isle of Man as high value goods, be traceable and exported. I've had my own struggles with government, and public debate was one of those issues, which is why I'm now separate. But the entrepreneurial vision needs to be set from the very top, that health, wellness and opportunity for economic diversity, this island fits the bill better than anywhere on the planet. I'll give three very quick examples. The Isle of Wight, now a capital for garlic production. Porlock for oyster production. And Wales, sunny Wales, exporting seaweed to Japan. If we can't replicate and creatively swipe that, we need shooting.
Now, another one, this is again moving off that, slightly off that topic, but staying on the diversification subject.
Yep.
This one is from Kevin. And Kevin, he was listening to the earlier programme, the Sunday Opinion, and he says it was interesting to hear the private sector panellists on the first section of the show. Two common messages kept shining through. One is that government needs to butt out and stop trying to plan everything. And number two, we just can't pay anyone to be here or set up a business here. It's been 20 years now that people have been saying the same. So when do the civil servants plan on listening to people telling them what is glaringly obvious? Too many highly paid government jobs out there managing failure for their own benefit. That's the problem. We need an entrepreneurial economy, now not a civil servants managed economy. So let's just deal with, what do you think of those two? Courtney? First one, government needs to butt out.
Yeah, level playing field. Power is nothing without control. We need not to look to others for permission. I think the Nordic countries, Baltic states, offer enormous opportunity, and we heard from Robin Bromley Martin how the UK offers great value, great opportunity for our meat. So level playing field, get out the way and understand we need clear vision to take this forward. But yeah, it's not more bureaucratic reports. Entrepreneurs are difficult to manage. They are tricky, argumentative, work at midnight on a Sunday. We have some here that should keep the score. Others will go get the runs.
But there is an issue that a lot of people think that the responsibility for the development of anything is the government's responsibility, not the individuals.
It's a collaboration. There's a great need for personal responsibility in a world we haven't seen, if those of you who are fans of Jordan Peterson. So we need to take personal responsibility, and here they allow us to take personal responsibility between Ramsey and Hilbury on a motorbike or car at high speed. So we have laws that we fit into in town. We have laws that are in some countries excitable or different, but within the laws of this land, I think we can make disruptive legislation that can take us forward in a great way. But it has to have somebody conducting the orchestra, not each of the players just blowing hot air.
Now, there's a bit about 20 years now that people have been saying the same thing, and it's not happening.
It'll only happen when we run out of other people's money. So that's why we're having this conversation. If you look at medicinal cannabis, I give that example, perhaps not a Sunday talking point for some, but it's a therapy that has been used enormously for epilepsy reduction in Northern Ireland. It's used in 29 countries, 27 US states. So instead of watching reefer madness, we should actually look at the endocannabinoid system in a human being and understand what majesty is out there in terms of plants that heal the body. We're trying to deal with biological illness with chemical substances, and it's not working.
Well, of course, this business, you talk about biological, there's a lot of other countries. The Chinese medical system relies a great deal on animals and other natural substances. A friend of mine, his wife was a Chinese doctor originally, came to Britain, qualified as a UK doctor, a European doctor, and she always thought that the two put together was about the best mix you could get.
I love to meet people like our double heart-lung surgeon here from Tianjin. He's been here twice. He's set up heart-lung surgeries around the world. He's not convinced we have the will, but he can bring us here a TCM, a traditional Chinese medicine university. He said without it, the Isle of Man will sink into the sea, his words. He's just put in 100,000 square foot of wormery in China.
A square foot of
a wormery. So they're looking at the enzymes from worms in natural products, in healing, in medicines. What nature has is incredible. And the people will come here, but when I go to a CSP, they say, we've got 65 people in another jurisdiction, you might get more traction there. So when you bring someone here, have 18 meetings, 16 of them are not with government, and we need to understand and have that honest chat. And some of the people in government are great. I collaborate with them, they work hard, but the system grinds them in a backside covering, dare I say, process. It just kills the energy of any of us, even with a bit of energy. It's just so hard. So we have to have a new vision with clear leadership.
Right. Now, this brings us to a question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you're saying that it's not the will, it's not the ingenuity, it's not the vision even, whichever words you want to use, it's actually our existing, long-standing system, faults within it that bring things down to its knees. Is that what
I think
you're
it's
saying?
structural fault, and I would disagree. I'm not sure I said we didn't have the will. I think we don't have the leadership, which comes from the will to risk not getting re-elected. I've had MLCs say to me privately, we get what you're trying to do, but we need to be re-elected. So now many of us are seeing less of government in terms of political process. But with the whistleblowing committee, it means we can have these brutally honest conversations. And businesses only survive for two reasons. One, a clear belief you will win. That's the will. And secondly, brutal honesty. We don't have that. So that gap is there.
That says in the statement we have dishonesty. Where does that come about?
People leave the island. My lawyer would say no comment. We have to have that debate that others can't. I can't do this in other countries, so having left one near neighbour, we can have dialogues here that we don't have elsewhere. And with a tin-walled 1,000-year parliament, we can be that honest broker. We're not pulled by the same big forces. If you go to a supermarket in the UK, probably 90% of foods have come from 10 companies, 10 corporations. We have independence here, we have independent sellers, and that independence is what we must treasure and be more proactive in the world.
Probably 90% of our food here comes from those 10 big sources, doesn't it?
It does in many ways, but you look at the small industries, and we heard again, Robin and DEFRA, I met with Martin Perkins on Friday. You know, where do you get this access to immediately jump on an opportunity and say, what could we do to grow the entrepreneurs? What we're doing with many of these young minds, we're putting them on medicines. We're not looking at how their minds function and what the physiology is. These creative minds are the entrepreneurs of the future. Charlie Woolnough touched on it. Grow our own. They don't have traditional ways of thinking, but the people and the energy that wants to grow the island and stay here is enormous. We've not let it flourish, and I think that's a huge thing. There's an enormous amount of land that we can look at and say, we won't go with monoculture, we won't keep drying wheat with glyphosate. We'll look at how many foods and crop rotations you need for the soil, not to be burnt by these herbicides, but to be nourished and nurtured. And this soil, this land, these island products could be world leading.
Well, we have a cottage in the north, as I think I've told you, and the field that is directly beside it, literally over the fence, over the last 3 or 4 years has had a whole variety of crops, the farmer there. He's in it from turnips to sheep, to maize, to quinoa, and I don't know what he's going to put in it at the moment, but there's another one on the way.
Well, diversity. I mean, I've had bankers go to Singapore, and when one of them mentioned there was Lockton lamb, when they all worked out how to spell it, they put up the picture on the phone, and the other 6 guests said, we'll have the Lockton lamb. The price isn't relevant. I went to the jam factory by Oxford University, and my breakfast was Manx kippers. I was delighted to show my Manx badge with my friend. They just dive in for this food. And so this niche, I think Berry's Christmas puddings, fantastic, award-winning, round the world. And I think all these things as holistic food, so whether it be water or omegas or oysters or Christmas puddings, is all part of the Manx brand to take our name not to be tarnished anymore. We want to be aspirational.
When I've asked on this programme callers who are talking about buying locally, buying Manx meat, buying Manx whatever, and they come on and say, well, we get it from somewhere else, whether it's Tesco or wherever else, because it's cheaper. And I say, yeah, but what effect are you having on the Manx economy? And they say, I can't think about that. I've got to think about my family budget.
Yeah, there's elements of, you can probably stratify into 3. Very high end, middle, and people who struggle to afford these foods. But when you look at the foods in total, they're not that expensive once you start to get satiated by fats. You get full on those in a way you don't on carbs. It's very hard to gorge on fat. So looking at Manx fat-based, physiologically based products is great. But the niche high end, it doesn't matter what the price of Lockton lamb is in Singapore. Manx bankers and American bankers will buy it. And I think that niche, it's the old get big, get niche or get out. We're a niche country. We should be a nimble country.
It's going to change a bit once whatever happens with Brexit. But of course, at the moment, we've been competing with farmers in the UK who get EU subsidies that we don't get. That one, I presume, will be removed.
I can mention, I hope I'm not giving away any trade secrets, somebody on the island growing with some very clean land. The product that he could sell ordinarily would be £100 a tonne. If it's organic, it's £200 a tonne. But he's hoping to sell some sports bars that are £33,000 a tonne. So it's high value add, niche, it needs investment, it needs long-term vision. But when the Welsh are selling seaweed to Japan, I'm thinking, as we're 84% water, the Isle of Man could do quite well in our territorial waters.
Well,
we have access
that's
to
cultured
those
seaweed,
people.
isn't it? They're growing the stuff, not just wild like we have.
We have, one of my advisors is Michael Crawford. He's got awards from both China, Japan, and also South Africa and France. But he's written the book, if you like, on DHA, on brain food. He's helped harvest seagrasses in Japan for 12 years. He goes around the world explaining what our physiology, what the mother and child need to develop healthy brains. So by looking at the technology we're looking to bring in, and that's oysters, I'll be quite open, with Chinese investment, it will need government approval, it will add jobs, it will add educational abilities, and I believe Chief Minister's daughter speaks Chinese. You know, we have any amount of links we can harness, but we have to be visionary and we have to look at what our clear differentiator is.
Well, of course, these have to do.
Yep.
Takes us right back to where we come in the conversation in the end. Who has to be responsible for it? Otherwise, what you said, you have lots of separate people firing off in all different directions themselves. I mean, are we coming back to the department having to take the control?
Sound strategy, clear vision, who conducts the orchestra and who is there to blow hot air in trumpets.
Okay, now, before we go to the break, there's one more email here, which is, again, going back to the diversification, but from a different angle. And it says, obviously this is a teacher, over half of my sixth form class left the island and don't want to come back. There simply isn't the lifestyle you can have in the UK, and it's patronising to talk down to that age group and say they're wrong. Well,
I don't believe in saying they're wrong. Some of us who started, say, Blade and Jets, there were 3 of us who were quite tricky. But the system of awarding or ensuring that people get 10 or 15 GCSEs doesn't best serve their interest. Again, it's Jordan Peterson. Shoulders back, this is what we want to do. So we have to amplify both the young people's voice and the person's voice, and not the patient voice, but the people's voice. And once you say, what do those kids seek, we as in the older generation, I've just turned 60, have to hand the baton on and show them how you look after soils, how you grow multicultures, not monocultures in food. And that leadership we've lacked. We've let them let young people down, I think. They've left this island because we haven't given them the honest vision, the integrity of being a really proud nation, but reaching out in the world. So when I hear Brexit, it's the old 93% of the world does not live in Europe, an ageing society, and we have to grasp that difficult nettle with the young, and I think listen to them more.
But you talk about teaching them these things with the land, with how
stewardship.
to do it. Stewardship. But if you talk to the farming families, you find that quite a lot of farmers these days, not everybody, but quite a lot of them are middle-aged to elderly, and their younger offspring didn't want to put up with the work and the discipline that goes with being farming, and they went off to work for a bank. There's a big skills gap there.
There is a skills gap, and there's some young people here. I met not that young, but young enough, a lady of 27. She was milking one of the cows at one of the shows. She'd worked 3 years in Australia. She looked about 11. Absolutely brilliant. And she said, a happy cow is a healthy cow. So there are clusters of this, but if you look at Closeleys Farm, where we send or take to our friends in England, chorizo, there's a 24-hour shop there. I was watching that video yesterday online. So if there's a 24-hour shop, that sounds like an honesty box. These are opportunities for small niche businesses, and they can quadruple, I believe, their turnover.
How do you get the people to want? This is really the question I was asking. How do you get young people who might be ideal for it to want to go into it when it's seen to be an underpaid industry?
Give me a child from the age of 7, as one of the religions says. We need to educate children at their natural interplay with nature in which they live. Hopefully they walk to school without having these chemicals sprayed on their grasses as they walk, and gradually realising this pure isle, this lovely Mona's Isle, can be something if we base it on how we've lived. Less polluted land, less polluted chemicals, and something that at a young age it becomes part of the curriculum, that wellness is not only their right, it's their duty. Okay. And once you get that as a young age, I'll be gobsmacked if they don't say, I am proud like I am of the black bee's resilience. I never thought bees would interest me until I see the neonicotinoids and the genetically modified mosquitoes that America's bringing in. It will not end well. Anything they're doing, almost, sorry Mr. Trump and others, walk in the other direction. It's not going well.
Let's take a break.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Right, welcome back to the last part today of our Mannin Line. With me is Courtenay Heading. He's been talking about all sorts of medical things, really, but under the terms of wellness. Now, it's quite a complex subject. I can grasp most of it, Courtenay, but I'm not even getting all of it sometimes as we go along, because it's a very complex subject, this, isn't it? This is you who's got an expert in it, and you're trying to committed to it, and you're trying to explain people the value of what you believe it to be. But it's not really people like me or in general that has to be convinced, is it? It's the average member of public, and it also is the people who provide the health services.
Yeah, it'll be social movements, but what it will do is say that as wellness comes in, health goes out. So health is a state of body. Wellness is a state of being. They're very different. And the treatments that we have are very expensive compared with the smaller cost of eating better, moving more, not smoking. So they're very hard, intractable things to change, I grant it.
I was going to say, got a hard job to get somebody to give up his McDonald's.
We will, but they don't. They find that giving them up in, whether it be Loma Linda, Sardinia or Okinawa, that where they have the most diverse plants, where that natural behaviour over 20 years, this is a 20 to 30 year project, because if we don't, just like South Africa would have been bankrupted by carbohydrates, sometimes countries have to wake up and smell the coffee or smell the high fats, I'd say. And that process means that as you bring wellness in, as you align farming with agriculture meets wellness meets food, medicine gets driven out. So you find that people that are healthier and coming off and eating better diets reduce their medicines. And this is a problem so obvious in our faces when you have people on 10 medicines. Many times when they have de-prescribing, and there are de-prescribing clinics, once they come in to reduce the number of meds, the thing you have to do is change the terrain. You have to change the access to good, local, unprocessed, and foods that are not denatured. And that health spend will go down when better diets come up. America is the best example in the world of that.
Have we been prescribing just generally as a culture too readily? In other words, you turn up with the doctors with something and you come out with a prescription.
I try and avoid going to doctors because they seem to it's the system. They're well-intentioned, they're overburdened, they're overworked, but they have their guidelines, and those guidelines have been hijacked by commercial vested interest. The statins levels are just driven down because 8 of the 9 people on those committees in England come from the statins industry. This week they rubbished healthy oils, fish oils, and yet the studies and everywhere around the world say that authorship of that report, which was not made clear who the authors were, was driven by a certain medical model. So health spending will come down when we eat better, and that will be in schools. It will not have wound healing clinics here where within 10 feet you can get sugars and carbonated drinks. Andrew Newton tried 3 years ago, and I helped him a little bit, to try and bring in a sugar tax, to have that debate, to at least start, even if we can't do the sugar tax for political reasons, can we remove these carbohydrate normalisation diets?
I admire your enthusiasm, Courtney, and indeed that shows, but I just have an instinctive feeling that this is not a quick fix. This is a very long campaign.
I've got 20 to 30 years. My brother, who I respect enormously, my oldest brother, he said, "You're trying to turn around a super tanker," when I first put on my first statins debate. And I said, "Maybe I am. I'm throwing peanuts at it." Then a good friend said, "Yes, but you only need to get a few peanuts in the airbox."
Right, well, if you'd like to put on your equipment, we'll talk to our first and only caller at the moment on the line today. That's Stephen. Good afternoon to you, Stephen.
Good afternoon, Roger, and good afternoon to your guest. The reason I've called is to firstly say, well done. I always enjoy the speech programmes that Manx Radio produces, and I think it's probably the main reason that certainly I listen to Manx Radio is because I like to hear other aspects from what people are doing around our island. Now, I think it was suggested by one person that gave evidence to the yet again another investigation into Manx Radio and how it's funded and its broadcasting, etc., etc., that possibly the speech aspect is one that is too much. Now, I would disagree most strongly with that viewpoint and say...
Excuse me interrupting you, Steve. Somebody giving evidence said we have too much speech, is that it?
I believe so, yes. It was
Really?
an MHK said that we had too much speech aspect to the station. Now, for me, I would say I completely disagree with that viewpoint and hope it's not given any real weight, because I feel that the nature of Manx Radio being our public broadcaster is to ensure that there's as much public broadcast and as much speech content done as possible. I'd like to see more programmes, even going out into the towns and villages occasionally with a roving mic and just speaking to people outside Douglas on the topics of the day.
Well, you realise, Steve, that we used to do that, if you remember, Steve. But of course,
I do.
But a lot of this comes down to the old story, despite what people might say, to budgets. For instance, the programme you just heard, which we did, the Any Questions, we don't do as many of them as we used to do. And the reason for that purely is they cost quite a remarkable amount of money to produce. If you take on
I'm sure that's the case, and I think it's something that people who are cabellating about the funding of Manx Radio should be really being reinforced to them. After all, I don't really think that many of us listen to Manx Radio for the music. We listen for all the other aspects that it produces.
Yeah. Where do you turn to when you want to know what's happened with the snow?
So well done for the speech, well done for the programme that's been produced, and I do hope that you can squeeze the budget and get out and about a bit more as well.
Well, thank you, sir. But you might like to know, because I'm this time just making the point, it was nearly, by the time we take it all together and we take on the arranging of it, the actual turning up and the night between our team, engineering tests in the building first of all, setting the engineering up, taking the engineering down, and then Catherine then took the recordings and edited them down from 1.5 hours to 45 minutes. Then we tidied it all up, and then we're here today playing it. Close to 20 hours. That's quite a lot of man hours when you think of it for a 45-minute programme.
That is certainly a lot of man hours, and I hope that whenever your management team make this point of the committee, they reinforce these the salient points of the actual time involved too.
Yeah, well, we don't often mention it,
speech
but I thought it
programme.
might be a good point to do so today, as we've just done one. You know, and there we are. Well, thank you,
Brilliant.
Steve. We're right at the end of the programme, but thank you for joining us. He's gone. Right. Okay, well, we are at the end of the programme, Courtney, so thank you for joining
Can I make
us.
one point about causes?
About what, sorry?
About upstream causes.
Yeah, right. We've got literally half a minute.
Okay. Yes, in finishing, I'd like to say if we look at the upstream causes of the illness that burdens what is a health service, those upstream causes, if we create economic opportunities from them, give us an unparalleled opportunity that no other nation has. Upstream causes as part of economic diversity.
Right. Courtenay Heading, thank you for being our guest on the Mannin Line today. Catherine Nichol was on the switch. I'm Roger.